Fred, and I'm just delighted that I was invited to be here with you for this weekend and put together a couple talks around this theme of transformational change. When Fred called me up, it was last fall, and asked if I'd be willing to do a couple talks, and this is the theme, transformational change. And right away my mind went to this concept of reconciliation ecology that I'll be explaining to you, because that's what I was working on for my sabbatical. Later, I realized transformational change could mean lots of different things. I'm not sure exactly what Fred meant when he asked for that, but it fits with this concept of reconciliation ecology. And just by way of introduction, I was doing a sabbatical looking at what will it take, why is the faith community slow to get involved in environmental issues. And I suspect you all can tell stories as well. There are some wonderful examples to the contrary, but in general, the faith community is not leading the charge in terms of taking care of the creation. And so my sabbatical was focusing on what are some of the reasons for that, and what can we do to try to inspire the faith community to really wake up and take ownership of this creation care responsibility that we have. And I was investigating this concept of reconciliation ecology, which has emerged in the secular arena. Reconciliation obviously is a very faith-based word and has lots of rich meaning. But there's this concept of reconciliation ecology that's come out of a secular ecological community, and it caught my attention. And I thought, well, maybe there's something there. If we start talking about creation care in terms of reconciliation, maybe that would hook Christians more firmly to this responsibility than what we've been doing in the past. And so that's what I want to do with the talk this morning and tonight, is kind of unpack this idea of reconciliation ecology for you. And this morning I'm going to do it largely by a story. I'll introduce the concept initially, but then I want to tell you a story that I think really illustrates reconciliation ecology sort of in practice. All right, so what is reconciliation ecology as defined by the secular ecological community? It really was introduced by this guy, Michael Rosenzweig, in his book that he entitled Win-Win Ecology, How the Earth's Species Can Survive in the Midst of Human Enterprise. He's out of Arizona State. And Rosenzweig says we need to reconcile human uses of the planet with those of other species. That's the concept that he's developed. And he points out, and I'm not convinced these are accurate numbers, but they're probably not far off, but he says that 5% of the land surface is protected, whereas 95% is human-dominated. There's also Arctic areas and tundra areas and things like that, so my mind starts playing around with those numbers. But the point is, a very small percentage of the Earth is protected for nature, for creation, and a large percentage of it is dedicated to supporting Homo sapiens. What we've got to do is we have to look at the human-dominated environment, and we have to figure out ways to do the human-dominated environment better so that biodiversity can be welcomed back. Just one quick example that I noticed this weekend. Down at the Pines, where the faculty stay for Au Sable. Au Sable has let the shoreline just go natural. All right? And I've had a couple conversations with neighbors who are not happy about that, because the natural shoreline makes seeds, and the seeds blow into their beautiful, manicured, pure beach, and then they have to pull the weeds out. But that's been Au Sable's approach, is just to let it be, right? And we have delighted these last few weeks in watching a great blue heron who flies in to Au Sable's shoreline, and he'll walk very slowly down. I've lost a lot of time just watching this guy, very slowly, every once in a while, grabs a frog or a fish. He'll get down to one end of Au Sable's beach where it's natural, and then he'll turn around, and he'll come back. And if he gets disturbed, he'll fly up, and usually goes right straight across to where there's another little patch of natural vegetation. He never goes to the beaches that are pure sand, right? It's just Au Sable's beach and this one across. And I take from that is that here, we're existing there, we're having a fine existence, right? But we're existing in a way that allows nature to exist with us. Right? Whereas other people are existing there and having a great time, but their impact on the environment is such that they're not welcoming back to other elements of creation. And so reconciliation ecology is asking us, let's take a good hard look at how we do cities, how we do transportation, how we build buildings. And can we do those in a way that allows the rest of nature to coexist with us, as opposed to sort of excluding them? And I've really taken to this concept, and I think that the faith tradition and some of the meanings from a faith perspective behind this word reconciliation ecology add even more excitement to it. So I'm just introducing it here this morning, and then tonight's talk I'll add some of those faith aspects to it and fill it out a little bit more. Quickly then, just a historical progression. So preservation is setting aside natural areas. So if we think about the history of human beings here in North America, first we had indigenous peoples, right, that lived pretty much in balance with the creation, but then Europeans came over and started altering things. And early on there was this movement for preservation, setting things aside because we don't want to destroy it all. And so this was the national parks movement, right? John Muir, Sierra Club was founded. So think back in the late 1800s, mid-1800s, late 1800s. So we have people starting to recognize that we need to take care of creation and let's set some places aside. After that, conservation arose. And this is the idea, it's not enough just to set places aside, right? We need to manage them. If we just set them aside, non-native species might get in there, or we've lost top carnivores, or there's some imbalances. So just fencing it off is not sufficient. We have to be actively managing it to keep the beauty and the integrity there. So conservation biology, if you want a name to put with that, Otto Leopold would be a really good example of good conservation biologists. So this is now into the 1900s, early to mid-1900s. Conservation biology becomes more popular. Now we get into the 1970s, 1980s, and the concept of restoration ecology emerges. And this came largely out of recognizing that we've got these preserves that are managed, but on a broader scale, we've got to think about corridors between these preserves. And we've got to think about creating new preserves that are closer so that we can have movements, because these creatures need to migrate and all these sorts of things. So restoration ecology emerged. Let's restore some habitats to connect some of those preserves. And so then, and there's so many degraded areas that we could bring back and they could support more life. And so restoration ecology really emerged out of, it started in the University of Wisconsin in the 1970s, 1980s. So the concept of improving degraded areas. And then I would say reconciliation ecology would be the next paradigm. And notice these are not replacing each other. It's still important to do preservation, right? And it's still important to do conservation and restoration. So these are just sort of growths out of each other. Maybe that's not a really good metaphor, but you see they emerge from one another. So here, reconciliation ecology is sharing our habitats deliberately with other species. Reinventing the human presence to better accommodate, affirm, and fit into the landscape of biodiversity which surrounds us. So this is the science of restoring, creating, and maintaining habitats and conserving biodiversity in the places where people live, work, or play. So it's not that we need to manage that preserve over there. Let's take care of where we are, and let's do it in a way that invites creation back. All right, a story to illustrate this concept. And this comes from a place down in Costa Rica. I did a sabbatical here in 2005. And I had taken Calvin students down to this spot just about every other year for many years with Randy Mandrat. Some of you know Randy Mandrat, a colleague of mine at Calvin. This is the Upper Rio Savegre watershed in southern Costa Rica. It's in cloud forest. The ecology here is that in the mornings, you'll see some of my pictures that were taken in the morning. It's sunny and bright, and usually the nights do clear out. But this is an area where the Central American isthmus is very narrow, and it's also very high. So the sun hits the mountains in the morning, warms them up, warm air rises, and as it does so, the convection pulls up moist air from the oceans, from both sides. And so you get this movement of moist air coming up, and as it cools, it forms clouds. So you can actually be standing there about 10, 11 o'clock in the morning and look down the valley, and you see this bank of clouds coming up towards you. And it's almost a daily occurrence. You can kind of set your watch by when do you get enveloped with these clouds. The clouds come up and they've got all this moisture, and they just bathe the trees, and so it's like a rainforest. There is a field station there. This is run by Southern Nazarene University, called the Quetzal Educational Research Center, or the QUIRC. It's right at about 7,000 feet in elevation, and we're looking down the valley that way. There is a peak, second highest peak in Costa Rica. It's called Cerro de la Muerte, which is 11,400 feet. So this is just behind us, so we're up on this slope. And this field station is built on the property that's owned by a family called the Chacons. And it's the story of this family that I want to convey to you. But we lived here in 2005, and it's a rural little valley, dirt road that goes into this valley. And our kids went to the local school there, learned Spanish really well, way better than I learned Spanish. And it was just a really wonderful experience. So the pictures I have are from multiple trips. They're not all from just 2005, but other trips that we've taken down there with students as well. Here's the little school, just to give you a little flavor, cultural flavor of the valley. School where our kids went. This is our daughter Rachel. This is our daughter Annalie, who's Chinese. She was a real novelty in the valley. People were very confused. They thought my wife had been married twice and had a Chinese husband first. But here she is here too. She's a little preschooler then. And, they learned an awful lot about Costa Rican culture. There's a lot of pride among Costa Ricans. One thing that was very refreshing, I've been to other countries and on other travels, Costa Ricans are really happy to be Costa Ricans. They don't meet me as a North American, and I don't get this sense that, boy, they really wish they were North Americans. They're quick to point out a lot of differences between Costa Ricans and North Americans. And all of those differences, of course, are in favor of the Costa Ricans. But it was refreshing, right? They have a lot of pride in their place, their country, and of this valley. Here is the entire preschool through 5th grade. And it was a 2-room schoolhouse. Preschoolers and kindergartners were in one. This was the going away party for our kids, so they gave our kids a hat with the Costa Rican colors. Our son Micah here was 5th grade at the time. It's also very interesting in that many of these kids are grandchildren of the Chacon family, who were the original homesteaders, but many of these kids are also immigrant Nicaraguan kids. They come in the valley to work. And so you have some very poor people, as well as the Chacon family now is doing very, very well financially. And so it's a real socioeconomic mix. But it's a really wonderful cross-cultural experience for us. Here are some pictures of the valley. This is the Rio Savegre. It's translated as the Savage River that flows down through the valley. Beautiful mountain stream. Here's a morning picture of the cloud forest before the clouds come up. Here they are coming on up. The trees here, the big trees, are oaks, which is really strange to be down in Costa Rica and see acorns. It took me a little while to get used to that. Understory is a lot of a tree that I'll tell you more about in a minute, avocados. And not big avocados like we eat, but small little marble-sized avocados that are really important for birds and other wildlife. So you have sort of this overstory of oaks, and they can be up to 100, 120 feet tall. I mean, our biggest oaks, like in the Grand Rapids area, would be about 60 feet tall, maybe half of that. So you get these really towering oak trees, and then avocados, there's some palms, and then down here there's bamboo, and then we have things like begonias, and peace lilies, and things you see in the mall up here are actually growing out there, right in the understory. Just a fantastically beautiful forest. Here's some of the oaks. There's one grove of them that the Chacons claim are over 2,000 years old. I have no idea how they would know that, because nobody's ever cored these trees. But I also don't doubt that it might be true, because they're slow growing, and these are just monstrous trees. Here's where the river goes through a waterfall, and Mike is going for a quick swim. I say quick swim because the water's so cold. The joke in the valley is that nobody in the valley knows how to swim, because you can't stay in the water long enough to learn. some birds in the cloud forest. This is a quetzal. It's sitting on its nest. And again, there are these claims that are made. The Chacons say that this is the highest density of quetzals anywhere on the planet. And I don't know how they know that, and I also don't know if I would disagree, because there are a lot of quetzals here, and lots of birders come to this valley now to see the quetzals. This is a really fantastic bird. These are some, I always call them tail feathers, but because I'm not an ornithologist, but they're actually, I think, extensions of the wing. And this is coming over the top of the head of the bird as it's sitting there. This is one I just took this past January, and this is a more mature male. And you can see these very, very long tail feathers. Well, they're not tail feathers, they're wing coverlets or something like that. And, but it's if you're a big birder, right, this is a big coup. You can see it cuts off. And so lots of birds. Now here's another bird from the forest called a toucanet. And you might think, whoa, Dave is an amazing photographer. Well, this one flew into our window and kind of knocked itself out. We nursed it back to where it was able to sit up, and I quick took a bunch of pictures before it flew off. There's another one. So it's a small little toucan. And lots of hummingbirds up there. And the field station is surrounded with hummingbird feeders, so you have hummingbirds constantly around. And sometimes they get into the building, and then we have to get the net out and catch them and show them the way out. But in the process, you get a nice close-up look at these amazing little birds. This is called a crested guan, feeding off of one of the palm trees. It's an understory tree there. This is like a big turkey. And then I was hoping that Finn and Raina would be here, so I put some interesting pictures. I think they're interesting, of some insects. Lots of moths up there with all kinds of cryptic coloration. This one was really fun. My daughter Rachel is like me. Whenever we go out hikes in the woods, me and Rachel are the last ones, and everybody else gets irritated with us. But Rachel and I just love to poke around. And I was showing her this moth, and then when you agitate it, of course, it puts its wings out, and you see these owl eyes, guys. That's what they're called. And I was explaining this to her, and the moth was sitting there real nice and doing this for us. And she said, I don't know, Dad. I think it looks more like a cat. And I said, really, what? And she said, look upside down. It looks like here's the eyes, and here's the nose, here's the whiskers, and here's some teeth. And I thought, whoa. I said, no, you're wrong. I'm the one with the PhD. But it wouldn't surprise me at all if this was mimicking a cat, because there are jaguars up there, and there are ocelots, and creatures that would look like this that would certainly scare a bird if the bird is trying to. Actually, it looks like it didn't work too good. It's close. And then there was this one. I don't even know the name of this moth, but this one came at night, and I thought, well, it's about an inch and a half long. I took a picture of it, and then later when I was sorting through my pictures, I looked at this more closely, and then I realized what was going on here. All right? Here's this moth, and its head is down here. All right? These are fake eyes, and these are fake antennae. So it's trying to show a bird, here's the head, come and get me, right? And then I showed this to our entomologist at Calvin. He said that most moths don't have, so he doesn't have his wings out where you would see this underwing. There's extra wing material here that has been produced to have this little painting. And I think even where the reflection would come off the eyes, right? It's not symmetrical. They're both on the same side. It's just so exquisite in this small little creature. And then look at all the lines. It's like the golden arches showing you where to go for food. Go that way. I want you to get a sense that this is an amazingly beautiful valley. Because that plays into the Chacon story. This was a very strange moment. Rachel had this butterfly land on her mouth. And it stayed there for, I'm not exaggerating, at least a half an hour. And it's a strange, I think, it's a strange butterfly. It's also a strange child. That was oh my goodness. And then a few other creatures. There are lots of beetles there. And large beetles. You get large trees that die, and so you have large beetles that eat them. Cicadas. Cicadas are supported by oaks. You get them here. We get them down there. Just a Central American version of a rhinoceros beetle. This is a dung beetle. So if you think about the size of this dung beetle, think how big the dung must be. And there are tapirs in the area, as well as some of those big cats. And so imagine there's some big piles of dung. And a few tarantulas as well, which always adds excitement to any walk, real quick tour. This is a beetle grub. Oh my goodness. A lot of protein packed in there. These are metallic beetles that actually are endangered because they're favorite of collectors. And we were told that you could sell a beetle like this in San Jose for $25. And we didn't try. Here's a grasshopper. This is crazy. Looks like somebody got the model glue out, or paint out, and was painting it. All right, and I'm a botanist, so I have to show a few plants as well. This is an indigenous plant there. It's a vine called Bomaria. Beautiful red flowers pollinated by hummingbirds. This is an anthurium. A big, long, like a jack and polka type thing, right? Same family. This thing, I came across this thing. I didn't even know what kingdom this belonged to. For like a month, I didn't know if this is a fungus, or if this was a plant, or if this was a protist, or what. It's actually a plant. It's a parasitic plant. And these are flowering stalks, so all these are little flowers. But it's crazy. It was wonderful. Just saw the joy of discovering these new things. Some bromeliads, the air plants. This is a little St. John's wort that grew up in the alpine areas. Flower looks very similar to our St. John's worts. The leaves look terrifically different because it's an alpine thing. A few more alpine. Once you get up higher, about 10,000 feet, then you get tundra, tropical tundra, which is very strange. And you get some really crazy plants. Lots of hummingbird pollinated plants. So tubular and red or orange. This is a bat pollinated one. Hibiscus family. It might look a little bit like hibiscus too. Here is one of those small little avocados. And ginger, a heliconia that makes it up into the cloud forest. This is a little orchid, a very strange orchid that smelled like rotten fish, right? It's fly pollinated. And they have Indian paintbrush down there too, which I thought was really interesting. Different species than ours here, but really pretty. And right, this is a melastome, and this is great fun because it is one of those plants, like we have calmia. What is that? Sheep. What is calmia? Sheep or barboro. Does the same kind of thing. These stamens are triggered, and so a bee will come in here to get the nectar down in here, and it pushes against these little appendages. And as it pushes, eventually it applies enough pressure that this just whacks the bee right on the butt. And then you see the pollen. So this was, we didn't have TV, so this was our entertainment. See the bees go in there and get whacked. Okay, then the last picture I wanted to show is this one, just before I get into the story of the Chacones. This is up on top of Cerro de la Muerte, the second highest peak in Costa Rica, where you can actually see both coasts, both oceans from the same spot. There's only 3 places in Central America where you can do that. It has to be a really clear day to see the Caribbean, but we can always see the Pacific. And this is the shadow, as the sun is rising. This is the shadow of the mountain against the ocean. I thought that was really cool. Down here is Manuel Antonio National Park, but the real Savegre Valley that we lived in is just over here off the side. Okay, so beautiful valley. And the valley was uninhabited until Efrain Chacon and his brother Fernando homesteaded it in the early 1950s. And when I learned about this, it just really blew my mind. In the 1950s, this valley had not had any humans ever live in it. Right? The Mayans, which were the indigenous people here, are never known to have had any villages above 5,000 feet. So here we're at 7,000 feet. It could be that Mayans had moved through, but nobody had ever lived there until he came with his brother and started clearing the forest. And their intention was to bring their families in and homestead this valley. So they did, and they brought a couple cows, and they brought their wives, and they started having their families. Now the valley is kind of separated into the northern part is Efrain and the southern part is Fernando. They each had 11 children, which I thought was really peculiar. I don't know if it was a contest or what, but from just 2 couples, right, then you get 11 kids in each couple, so there's 26 people from 2. So human population growth was going up fast. But Ephraim tells his story to our students when we go down there to visit, that he was clearing the forest, and bringing in the cows, and the cows were doing really well, but these banks are really steep that go down to the river. And the cows on the steep banks were causing erosion, right? And they were trying to stop that erosion because he liked to fish the stream too. But he was recognizing that they were having an impact. And the family kept expanding, and they kept clearing more and more forest. And they got to a point where now the kids started getting married and settling in the valley. And they got to a point where they had a big family meeting and decided they need to clear a really large area of forest because now the grandchildren are showing up. And so they plotted out some area of their land, more forest that they're going to clear. And he tells the story that he was out there with his son Marino, his oldest son. And they were cutting down trees for this expansion of their property and of their dairy herd. And he said that they were cutting down this big oak tree. And it's a white oak. And he said, we're cutting it down with axes. And thank goodness we had axes. He said, because when you cut trees down with an axe, you get tired. And when you get tired, you have to sit and rest. And when you sit and rest, you have time to think about what you're doing. I wish I had Ephraim here to tell you the story himself, because it's really captivating. But he says, we were sitting there resting from cutting down this big tree, and I looked ahead at all the forest that we were going to cut down. And I thought about how beautiful the forest was when we first came to the valley. And I thought about the animals that we're not seeing very much anymore, the howler monkeys, and the jaguars, and the brocket deer. And he said, I was sitting there with my son Marino, and I looked into the future, and I thought about my grandkids, and I didn't like what I saw, because we're losing the beauty of this valley. And he says, I had an epiphany. That's the word that he uses. And he's Catholic, so he understands the meaning of that word. And he said, I said to my son Marino, we're not going to cut down this tree. In fact, we're not going to cut down any more trees. We have to figure out a different way to live in this valley so that the kids can see the beauty that I do when I came here. And so they did. They walked down there, and there's still this tree with a notch cut out of it, right? And it's become this very meaningful, almost sacred tree to the family. It indicated a point when they made a change of course. And he decided that cows were not good for the river, and they needed to cut down too many trees, so they replaced the cows with fish farming and with orcharding. So they planted trees on some of the old pastures, and they learned how to grow apples and peaches and cherries. And they opened an ecotourism lodge to attract people to come to see the quetzales. And so they made this enormous change. And as I think about this too, he was a cow farmer from day one. I mean, he was raised on a farm, and that's what he knew how to do. He was really good at it. And he decided that that wasn't a good practice in this particular location. And he made this shift, and there was a lot of risk involved, because he was getting into things that he didn't know how to do. But he was willing to take the risk for the sake of the beauty of that valley. And since then, they have done really, really well. I'm sure there have been ups and downs, but they have a very popular ecotourism lodge. They have over 10,000 ecotourists that come and stay at their lodge every year. In fact, they're worried that it might be too many, that now they're having too many, before they had too many cows, now maybe they have too many birders that come to the valley. But he also, in talking through with them, they had started to plant avocado trees in the old pastures because they didn't need as much open area to support the orchard as they needed for the cows. So they're trying to restore some of these old pastures. And so that was an experiment that I set up when I was down there, was to see how best to raise these avocado trees to attract quetzal traffic. So a couple more pictures. Here was the original little hut that they put up back in the 1950s. This is one of the more modern houses now that one of the Chicon kids lives in. They call this the bodega. Here is their compound where they've got these areas cleared, very steep slopes. All these little dots that you can probably make out are apple trees. And they ship apples all over the country, as well as fish. The fish farming that they do has been very, very successful. And so there's the family compound with the houses for the different kids, and now the grandkids come along. Here's Howl Monkey that has come back to the valley. I didn't take this picture in the valley, but I took it a different place in Costa Rica. This mother had a little baby attached down here. Tapirs, we didn't see tapirs in the valley, but we see tracks. These are also referred to as mountain cows. I always thought of them as sort of down along the coast, but they definitely live up in the mountains. And tapirs are coming back. And when you get some of these large ungulates coming back, then you attract back the large cats. And again, if you think, boy, Dave's a pretty brave photographer. This is at the Belize Zoo. There's a very strong fence between me and this animal. I just put my camera so it would look right through a little opening. But some researchers from Point Loma, Nazarene, have gone down there with camera traps. And they have set up some camera traps, and they definitely have captured jaguars really quite close to that facility. So the jaguars are definitely coming. People are seeing them more often. There's even a black melanic form that's hanging around there. So it's very exciting to see the creation respawn back again. So here they are, Efrain and his oldest son, Marino, who is one of the best birders in the country of Costa Rica. He's a highly sought-after guide, and he teaches young Costa Ricans how to become guides. He's part of the national program. And there they are. This is Rolando. Oh, I got their names up here. One of the sons he runs the ecotourism lodge. And here's the picture of their lodge. It's a beautiful place. And then at night. Okay, here we have some of those birders. And this was interesting. I was doing some of the work I was doing with the avocado trees, but I was also just documenting species up here and bringing them down to the National Museum for the herbarium there. And so this was a morning where I had a meeting down at the National Museum, which is about 3 hours away. And this is the road going out of the valley. And sure enough, there's a group of birders like there was here at El Sabo this morning, right? Out, and they'd seen a quetzal right over here. So who knows what country they're from, but they're Scandinavian people, Europeans, a lot of Asian people would come to this valley. And so I had to just wait. It's not like I could honk my horn, right, because the bird might fly off. And they got the cameras all set up, and so these people have come from a lot. So I just turned my car off and wait until the bird hopefully flies away, and then they disperse. And I thought, as I was sitting there, I thought, there was probably a time in this valley where people would have to wait with their cars when there were cows, right, in the road. And now, I think this is a better option. And I'm not suggesting there's any similarity between birders and cows. So just to summarize, they had unsustainable practices of clear-cutting the forest on these steep slopes and raising cows. Even though that was successful, they made lots of money doing it. Now they have more sustainable alternatives. Mixed orchards, fish farming, and ecotourism. And here are 3 of the grandkids, Raquel and Monica and Javier, and our 2 daughters. They became really good friends. So Efrain was thinking about the future for his kids and made this big change. A little bit of experiment. I couldn't help but put some of these slides in because I just worked up this last semester a paper that we submitted for publication on this experiment. Very simple experiment. This was a hill. Here's that field station, the little bodega. And this is a very steep hill where we put a couple of transects across there. And each spot here had a tree planted, an avocado tree. And we did different soil treatments. One of the treatments was just indigenous soil. One was with horse manure mixed with soil. And the other was kitchen compost mixed with soil. One thing that had not been going on in the valley was using compost. They're carting all the compost out. And so I wanted to show them that compost is a very useful resource. So secretly I was hoping the compost would do the best, although us scientists are always completely objective. So how do you do this? Well, underneath these avocado trees, there tends to be lots of little baby seedlings that come up. And so we would dig them up, put them in these little makeshift containers. I kept them in a little tree nursery I had for a month to make sure that they would survive the transplant. And then we dug a bunch of holes on the slope. And when the going gets tough, I've learned the best thing to do is to find some college students. And so I had 2 Calvin College students come down here and come down to Costa Rica and help me dig these holes. And not huge holes, but we wanted to put about 3 gallons worth of soil into each of these holes. And we mix up the soil treatments, horse manure, and straight soil, and then compost and straight soil. This was our pile of soil down here, which had just been dumped there. And we're up on the slope where we're planting. You can see here too, this shows you the steepness. It's almost vertical gardens. These are all apple trees. Each of these is a different apple tree. And then the fun part is lugging all the soil up this steep slope. Again, the college students helped me out immensely. This is Kate Locke and Nate Hahn. Nate has been up here at El Salvador. He's doing a PhD in restoration at the University of Washington. But here we are lugging the stuff up. I tell my restoration ecology students, restoration is a lot of hard work. And if you don't like getting dirty and you don't like sore muscles, then maybe you should think about a different class, like wildlife ecology. Different class like that. This is hard work. But it's also really fun. Then we lug the seedlings up and put the seedlings in. And every time I would go back, like every 2 years or so, we would measure the seedlings. And so I had a data set that builds over time. And before I left, I went back and looked at the seedlings, and they were doing well. Only one had died. So it was 83 out of 84 survived. But some of them had lots of weeds growing by them, and I thought, oh no, is this all from the compost? And so my idea of showing the Chacones that compost is really useful, I thought, oh shoot, did I just put a whole bunch of weeds out there? So we analyzed it, and the weeds, I just ranked the weeds from 0 to 5. So it was fast and dirty, numerical value. But it didn't show any difference across the 3 different types. What really got the weeds going was light. So here's deep shade to full sunlight. So depending on where the hole was, that's where you saw a lot of weeds. So that was a relief to me. But then 9 years later, so here they are when we first planted them, they're all less than a foot tall. And then 9 years later, without any care, nobody's going up there to water them or anything, most of them were about this size. And this is Sheila DeVries, a student I just was down there with in January this past year, and she helped write up this paper and process the data. And so the last graph I'll show you, but this shows over time, days after planting. So this was like the 2-month measurements. This was like 1 year, 2 years. Didn't go there in this plot, but this was like 4 years, 5 years, and then 9 years. And the 3 lines are the 3 different soil types. So this line is straight soil. And these 2 lines are the horse manure and compost. And I don't have the error bars on here, but when we worked the statistics, we saw significant show up here. So there was no significant difference with the 3 soil treatments until 4 years after planting, which I thought was really interesting. And look at the lines are really diverging, which leads me to wonder, what is it? Because I'm sure those roots are way past the soil, the 3 gallons of soil we put in. So what was it that got them out there? But that's something that we need to follow up with and investigate further. But I just thought it was a really cool study that turned out pretty nice, and see this big difference. So I bring this up just to come full circle now. The work that we did on planting these little avocado trees, I think is a really good example of restoration ecology. Right? We're taking an old pasture, steep slope. It's been grown up with lots of volunteers, early successional species, and we're trying to create a forest there. So that's restoration ecology. What happened to the Chacon family, I would say, is reconciliation ecology. All right? Where they were living a certain way in a certain place, and they realized that the way they were living was not good for the place, at least not good for the biodiversity of that place. And they chose to change the way they're living so that there could be more biodiversity that would come back. And so this, I think, is a really nice example of this concept of reconciliation ecology. And I think back to Ephraim's quote, I looked into the future and I didn't like what I saw. I had an epiphany. And it gets me thinking about us here in North America. When we're faced now with these really large environmental problems. Some of them are more local, but some of them are big, like climate change and like loss of species. And what is it going to take for North Americans to sort of look into the future and realize we're not headed in a real beautiful direction? And what is it going to take to sort of wake us up and invoke an epiphany of sorts, right? And what is it going to take for the church as well to really get engaged? And I'm going to just leave that rhetorical question out there and then revisit it in my talk tonight.